This is the largest Liebherr telescopic crane and it has a maximum capacity of 1200 tons, and in its maximum configuration it can lift to a height of almost 190 meters. This version of the model is in the unusual colours of Denzai-Juki, a Japanese crane hire company. It comes in a standard Liebherr branded box which is reasonably large and it's certainly heavy, and perhaps the only surprise is that there's no information at all about the real crane. Inside the box, the expanded polystyrene trays are a tight fit, so they need to be encouraged to see the light of day. And this is one of those times when anybody who has 4 arms and hands will have a distinct advantage. As you can see, the first thing that comes out in addition to the trays is an instruction sheet. It's big and comprehensive and it's in German and English. All in all, it's pretty good. It covers most of the assembly, and the only real omission is an itemised parts list. Anyway, enough of the paperwork, let's open up the factory sealed trays. The top part has got the counterweight tray, the spreader plates and a few other parts. Heading down into the middle layer, the parts are a bit more substantial. There are 4 sets of counterweight blocks, 3 different hooks and 2 lattice sections which fit on top of the boom. And if we dive into the bottom tray, it's the biggest and heaviest parts, which are the carrier and the boom. So as if by magic, here is the carrier out of the box, and as you can see it's very well wrapped and protected. Here we're using the CranesEtcTV mega speed unwrapping function to take off all of the wrapping, and at least it means the model arrives in very good condition. The boom is also very well wrapped and it's got this little instruction sheet telling you not to remove the foam from the Y-guy pulleys, and with that noted you can get on with unwrapping. The interesting thing about the boom is that it's an amazingly heavy part because it's nearly all metal and it consists of several telescope sections. But again, it's pleasing to note that the wrapping does a very good job and the model's undamaged. For this part of the assembly, we'll only put the model into a road-going formation, and the first thing to look at is the tiny nuts and bolts that are used. They're made of brass and they give the model a really high-quality engineering feel. Because the parts are so small, NZG provide these 2 special tools, and so if you do have somewhat porky fingers, the tools are a real help in assembling the model. The nuts and bolts are easily lost, but at least NZG do provide some spares in the box. To display the boom in a transport mode, the only parts that should be fitted are the 2 flexible guy restraints. And they're an easy enough part to fix, you just lift up the Y-guy arrangement and then fix the restraint at the bottom end of the boom. Once that's been done, you then fit the other end of the restraint to the end of the Y-guy arrangement. And again, it's easy enough to do, you just feed it into the connection point and then use the brass nuts and bolts to secure the connection. You just repeat the operation for both sides and then you've got your 2 restraints attached. And as they're a nice soft flexible material, you just feed them underneath as you close up the Y-guy. As long as it's all been fed in properly, you can then close the whole thing up and achieve the transport configuration for the boom. The real boom weighs around 100 tons, so it has to be transported separately. And here's a special vehicle from the CranesEtcTV fleet ready for the job. To carry the boom, 2 special adapters have been fabricated and they're made of the finest quality Lego. This shows that once again there's no expense spared at CranesEtcTV. Once the boom's on board and all levelled up, you're then ready to roll. So that concludes the first part of the assembly process, which achieves the model being displayed in its transport configuration. And it's great because if you don't have lots of space, then you can still have something that looks really interesting. The detail underneath the carrier is very good, with most of the transmission and suspension modelled in metal. The wheels are especially good with different hub designs, and the tyres have Michelin in the sidewall. The driving cab details are fine and it includes blue beacon lights, which is the correct colour for a Japanese vehicle. One strong point of this model is the Denzai-Juki graphics, which are both sharp and interesting. The detailing is also very good at the rear with an access ladder and plenty of graphics. Behind the cab, the engine area is good with a nice exhaust and plenty of diamond plated surfacing. The outrigger beams are metal, as are the pads and spreader plates, and the pistons are smooth without any unsightly screw threads. The crane cab is nice enough, it's got metal handrails and plastic grab rails. The crane body has got metal handrails and various details within the casting, and the metal counterweight blocks have got very sharp graphics. The main boom ramps have got plastic jackets, which are okay, but metal would have been nicer, but there are some decent graphics on them. The 4 boom mounting jacks are metal, as are the pads, and they're all very nicely engineered parts. There's a black plastic spool at the top of the first boom section, and the metal heavy lift head is a nicely made part with metal pulleys. The Y-guy arrangement is metal and well made, and again there's some very nice graphics. There are 3 hook blocks supplied, and this is the largest of them, and they're all well-made metal parts. The other optional attachment for the boom head is the short luffing jib, and again it's nearly all metal, it's well made, and it really looks convincing. It's time to take the big 9-axle Liebherr out onto the road, and it drives along fine in a straight line. Looking underneath, each of the axles is fully sprung with suspension, and every axle can be individually steered. The suspension is a really nice feature on the model because it's perfectly smooth, and it's quite satisfying to just gently bounce it up and down. Because all the axles steer, all of the steering modes of the real crane can be replicated, and here it turns through a nice curve. But for those times when you want to park at the airport and really baffle everybody else, you can set the crab steering mode. And that works perfectly well on the model too. Okay, so let's assume we've arrived on site and we're going to put the crane up. The first thing to do is to take the boom off of its transporter, and it can do this itself. It has 4 special mounting jacks which just pull out and rotate downwards. To maintain the correct positioning, the centre legs have a piece of bracing which just unfolds and then clips underneath the boom. And although it's hard to see, there's a little bracket which the end of the bracing clips into. So with the mounting legs out, we can then fit the pads on the end. And these are held in place by tiny steel pins which go through the pads and the end of the piston. This can be a bit fiddly, but if you think it's frustrating, just try doing it with your toes instead. Once attached, the pad can be lowered by unscrewing it, and you can lift up the boom on all 4 pads. With the boom having raised itself clear, the transporter can then drive itself out. If you're careful, you can extend the pistons to the maximum amount, and that then allows you to drive the carrier underneath so that the boom can be attached. The real crane can be assembled this way, and the carrier can either reverse in like this, or if you rotate the superstructure, it can go in forwards. To attach the boom of the model, you need to make use of giant loader arms and just lift it up and drop the connection point into place and feed in the pins on either side, and there's a nice little locking washer which also clips in over the end. With the pins all locked off, you can then attach the pistons of the main rams onto the boom. To do this, you have to take out the screw that's already in place and also rotate the mounting leg to one side to give you easy access. Once it's all lined up, it's an easy fit just to offer up the screw and then just use a simple screwdriver. You could try using your fingernail for this bit, but you'd have to do a series of somersaults to tighten the screw. With both sides attached, the boom is mounted and the crane is now able to move. And the last bit of tidying up to do is to remove the pads from the mounting legs and then fold them up. At this point in the assembly, I'm now going to cheat a bit because the boom is mounted over the rear of the carrier, and actually I want it pointing over the front. So to achieve that, I'll rotate the cab round and then turn the crane, but the real machine couldn't do this without having the outriggers down. But hey, this is CranesEtcTV, the home of cutting-edge technology. The real crane could drive on site in this configuration, but not on the road because it would be too heavy. Okay, we've arrived at the point we want to set the crane up, so let's get the outriggers out. They rotate smoothly, and that smoothness is also matched by the telescopic section. Again, fitting the pads just makes use of that simple pinning system, and you just rotate the pads to lower them. These outrigger beams are very strong, and they will support the model with its wheels completely clear of the ground. And there are also nice heavy spreader plates which go under the pads, while we wait for the next parts of the crane to arrive. First up, we'll just assemble the crane with the heavy lift head, and that just clips over the end of the boom. There's not enough room to get the nut holder into the top bolt, so here we're using a trick of a bit of blue tack on a screwdriver to get the nut on the end of the bolt. The bottom connections are much easier, and you can just use the tools to do those up. So now we're heading towards the favourite task of reeving up the hook. So firstly we'll take some thread off of one of the winch drums and take it towards the front. And for this rigging I'm going to use the largest of the 3 hooks that are supplied. Unfortunately at this point I can't show the video of the reeving of the hook because there was too much foul language. With the hook attached we can raise the boom a bit so that the hook hangs freely, and the main rams are stiff enough to hold the boom if it's not extended. Reeving the hook was a fiddly operation, and here's another one which is attaching the counterweight base plate. It's securely attached by a couple of screws which go through the bottom of the plate, and of course they have to therefore be installed underneath the crane body, which is quite difficult. So it's best done over the edge of a table. Once you've bumped your head and dropped a screw in your eye, you can then fit some of the smaller pieces. and this comprises of a couple of small metal ladders which fit on either side, and there's also a number of metal handrails which get clipped into place. Luckily they're all quite a good fit and they don't fall out easily. Another part to fit which the instructions don't mention is the exhaust pipe, and that just clips into place too. One thing you have to watch out for is these two short lengths at the front, because they can be impacted by the boom when you raise it. With all the handrails fixed, we can then mount up the counterweight. There's 16 blocks and they all interlock. And with the counterweight on, the crane is finally ready to do some lifting. So let's look at some of the other features. The cab can be lowered to ground level so a ladder's not required to get on board. And it also tilts so the operator doesn't get neckache looking up all the time. This is a big heavy model, but despite that it rotates very well. It takes a little effort, but it is perfectly smooth and there's no rocking at all, so it feels very secure. Another working feature is that you can lower and raise the hook, and the winch drum has a very nice positive spring-loaded brake. Now the sharp-eyed experts amongst you may have noticed that the hook reeving hasn't been done quite accurately, but don't worry, I'll surely put that right when you're not looking. Well, this is a telescopic crane and sometimes you do feel the need to extend your boom. So to do that you just pull out a telescopic section, and it's great because it comes out very smoothly and doesn't feel like it's scratching paint or anything. Once it's fully extended it uses a locking clip to keep it in place. Okay, so far we've built the crane up with a heavy lift head installed and we've extended the boom a little, but it's a long way off its maximum extension. To improve the crane's stability and lifting capacity there's an arrangement known as the Y-guy, and this has been fully modelled by NZG and works well. So to rig it on this configuration, the first thing to do is to pull up the Y-guy beams. And even though the rams that control this are only small, they are stiff enough to hold the beams up in place. You just keep pulling up the beams until they're about 90 degrees to the boom. And once that's done you can then smooth out the guy ropes that tie the beams to the bottom of the boom. And you just need to make them look like they're hanging naturally. The next thing to do is just to spool out some thread from the winches at the end of the beams. And you just use a winding tool and press in on the spring-loaded brake. For the heavy lift head there's a couple of short tie bars which have to be fitted at the top, and these are just connected and secured with the little brass nuts and bolts. With those fitted you can then take the Y-guy pulleys up to the end of those connecting bars and screw those into place. With all the connections made you can then start tensioning up the system by winding in on the winches. Once both sides are attached you can then achieve the next stage in the process, which is to spread out the beams. And by doing this you can see that it really stabilises the end of the boom. And it's that additional stability which gives the crane an improved lifting capacity. So now the crane is fully rigged with its heavy lift head attached. And now it's been extended to the maximum 4 sections of boom that's possible with the heavy lift head on. This produces an impressive model that's about 1.2 metres or 4 feet tall. But sometimes you've just got to go large and then you can fit on the luffing jib head, and that's designed for lighter loads at greater reach and height. With the luffing jib attached you can fully extend the boom and join the big leagues, because now the model is nearly 2.5 metres tall or about 8 feet. And if you're not happy with that you can get even bigger, heading towards 12 feet or 4 metres with the optional luffing jib kit. Overall this is a great crane model with excellent details, great functionality and it's high quality. It also looks very good in the colours of Denzai-Juki. There's no doubt it's an outstanding model.